Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into a stack of sources that really make you think about how groundbreaking science slams right into some harsh historical realities.
Yeah, we're talking about Werner Heisenberg.
Exactly. A scientist who completely flipped our understanding of reality, at the quantum level. But he's also, one of the most argued about figures of the 20th century.
Because of his role in the Nazi atomic project. It's that stark contrast, isn't it?
It really is.
The man basically invented uncertainty as a fundamental principle in physics. Philosophical uncertainty. But when you look at his own actions during the war, the historical certainty about his motives is, ironically, very uncertain, very murky.
That's really the core of what we want to unpack for you in this deep dive, this paradox of Heisenberg.
Right.
We'll explore the science, the kind of mathematical certainty he was chasing in quantum mechanics, and then juxtapose that with the, frankly, moral maze he navigated under the Third Reich.
And we'll break it down into two main phases looking at the sources. First, you have this, meteoric rise, the brilliant young quantum physicist, roughly 1925 to 32. Incredible period.
Yeah, game-changing stuff.
And then the second part, the war years. The political pressure, the moral dilemmas, leading the German atomic project from around 1939 to 45.
Okay, let's start with the science then. The sheer scale of his early achievements, it's kind of staggering.
It really is. He becomes a full professor at 26.
Incredible. And by then, he'd already made his huge discovery. It starts around 1925, right? He's wrestling with these atomic descriptions.
Yeah, and he has this unsettling realization, the things he's measuring, like position, momentum, they just don't act like normal numbers in the math. The old rules didn't apply.
So what do you do in the math breaks?
You invent new math.
Yeah.
That's what he did, along with Max Born and Pascal Jordan. They developed matrix mechanics. Basically a whole new system where the order you multiply things in actually changes the answer. A times B isn't necessarily B times A.
Which is completely counterintuitive for how we experience the world.
Totally. And Heisenberg's own reaction, you find in the sources, it's fascinating. He said he was deeply alarmed by it.
Understandable.
But also almost giddy, because he sensed he was onto something huge, like nature had just laid out this incredible mathematical structure.
And that structure, matrix mechanics, it was the foundation of quantum theory. That's what earned him the Nobel Prize, awarded for 1932.
But the concept that really shattered the old physics, the one everyone knows his name for, came in 1927, the uncertainty principle.
Okay, let's get this straight. This isn't just saying our instruments aren't good enough or we're clumsy observers.
No, that's the crucial point. It's not just about practical limits. It's ontological. It's about the fundamental nature of reality itself.
So what does it actually state?
Simply put, it says you cannot know both the precise position, that's delta x, and the precise momentum, delta p, of a particle, like an electron, at the exact same time. There's a fundamental trade-off.
The more you nail down one,
the fuzzier the other one gets. Mathematically, the uncertainty in position times the uncertainty in momentum has to be greater than or equal to a very small but fixed number, Planck's constant divided by 4 pi.
And he had that thought experiment to illustrate it, the gamma ray microscope.
Right. Imagine trying to pinpoint an electron's location. You need really high energy light like a gamma ray with a short wavelength to see it clearly.
Makes sense.
But hitting the electron with that high energy photon gives it a significant unpredictable kick. It changes its momentum in a way you just can't know beforehand.
So the very act of looking precisely at its position messes up its momentum.
Exactly. Observation isn't passive in the quantum world. It actively changes the system. It's baked in.
And this core idea, this indeterminacy that nature runs on probabilities, not absolute certainties, became central to the Copenhagen interpretation.
Which he developed largely with Niels Bohr. It was this whole new framework. Physics could only predict probabilities now, calculated using something called the Bohr rule.
And it included that other weird idea, complementarity.
Yeah, Bohr's big contribution.
Yeah.
Things like an electron acting as either a wave or a particle, depending on how you measure it. They're mutually exclusive descriptions, but you need both for the full picture.
This drove some people nuts, didn't it? Like Einstein.
Oh, Einstein famously hated it. He couldn't accept this fundamental randomness. That's where his famous line comes from. God does not throw dice. He believed there had to be some underlying deterministic reality we just hadn't found yet.
And within the Copenhagen view itself, there was this whole business about measurement causing the collapse of the wave function.
Right. The idea that before you measure, a particle exists in a cloud of probabilities, a wave function, then bam, you observe it, and it snaps into one definite state. The wave function collapses.
Although Heisenberg preferred a slightly different term.
Yeah, he often talked about reduction of the wave function. For him, it was more about a change in our knowledge. Once the quantum event registers on our classical instrument, our knowledge about the possibilities suddenly reduces to a single outcome.
It's subtle, but it points to ongoing debates, even between Bohr and Heisenberg, about where you draw that line between the quantum fuzziness and our classical world.
Absolutely. Deep philosophical waters there.
So Heisenberg is grappling with the very definition of reality in physics. But soon, the world forces him to grapple with a much more brutal question, defining his loyalty.
And here's the pivot.
Yeah.
Suddenly, this abstract thinker is plunged into the political and cultural vortex of Nazi Germany. He has to make a choice. Stay or go.
Which so many of his brilliant colleagues did. Einstein, Born, Schrödinger. They left. Why did Heisenberg stay? What kept him there?
The sources suggest it's complex, but a big factor seems to be his deep roots in the German youth movement from after World War I. It gave him this really strong sense of cultural nationalism.
So not necessarily Nazi ideology, but a feeling for German culture.
Exactly. He saw himself, it seems, as a guardian of German science, of German intellectual tradition Kultur. His mission, as he likely saw it, was to preserve this through the darkness, to ensure it survived the Nazis.
But staying meant confronting the regime's ideology head-on, especially this thing called Deutsche Physik.
Right, Aryan physics. This was a movement pushed by some other Nobel laureates, actually, Philipp Lenard and Johannes Stark. They basically rejected relativity and quantum mechanics. They called it Jewish physics.
Yeah.
Too abstract, too mathematical, detached from experiments, and what they called healthy common sense. It was deeply anti-Semitic and anti-theoretical.
And Heisenberg, as the top quantum guy left, became a target.
A major target. Between 1936 and 38, he was viciously attacked in the SS newspaper, Das Schwarze Korps.
What did they call him?
White Jew. And the spirit of Einstein's spirit. In that climate, those were incredibly dangerous labels. It wasn't just academic squabbling. This could get you arrested by the Gestapo.
And it had real consequences for his career, too, right?
Definitely. It blocked him from getting a prestigious professorship in Munich he really wanted. It led to a full year-long investigation by the SS. His situation was precarious.
How did he get out of that? It seems like he was really on the edge.
It was bizarre. Apparently, his mother knew Heinrich Himmler's mother, and an appeal was made. Himmler himself intervened.
Himmler, the head of the SS.
The very same. But it wasn't ideological support for Heisenberg. It was pure pragmatism. Himmler concluded, in July 1938, that Germany simply couldn't afford to lose a scientist of Heisenberg's caliber.
So he was exonerated, but at a cost.
A huge cost. It created what some sources call his Faustian bargain. He was now officially recognized as valuable, even essential to the state, which made it practically impossible for him to refuse work for the regime, especially military-related work, once the war started.
And the tragic irony here is just staggering. While Himmler is pragmatically saving Heisenberg for Germany,
The Nazis' own policies were actively destroying German science elsewhere. That 1933 law for the restoration of the professional civil service, it was a purge.
how many scientists were forced out?
Estimates vary, but somewhere between 13 to 18%. Just think of the brain power. Einstein, Born, Schrödinger, Bethe, Teller, Szilard. A huge chunk of the people who understood nuclear physics.
And where did they go?
Many ended up in Britain and the U.S., Princeton, Berkeley. The centers of physics literally shifted across the Atlantic.
So the Nazis basically handed the Allies the intellectual toolkit for the Manhattan Project.
It was an incredible self-inflicted wound. They drove out the very minds who could have potentially given them a decisive edge had things turned out differently.
Okay, so war breaks out. Nuclear fission had just been discovered, actually, in Berlin by Hahn and Strassmann. How quickly did the Germans get started on a nuclear project?
Very quickly. The Uranverein, the uranium club, was formally established by September 1939 under Army ordinance. They had a head start, scientifically speaking.
So the potential was there. Why didn't they get closer to building a bomb? We hear so much about the Manhattan Project, but what happened with the German effort?
Well, they ran into significant hurdles pretty fast, both technical challenges and, crucially, resource allocation in a wartime economy. There was a really key moment in June 1942.
What happened then?
Heisenberg and other leading scientists met with Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments. This was the moment to make the case for a major push towards a weapon.
And what did Heisenberg tell Speer? Did he say, yes, we can build a bomb, give us the resources?
No. According to the records, including Speer's memoirs, Heisenberg reported that yes, a bomb was theoretically possible, but it would require absolutely immense industrial effort, huge investment, and critically couldn't be ready before 1945 at the absolute earliest, probably later.
And Germany, by mid-1942, was already stretched thin, especially after stalling in Russia.
Exactly. Speer heard huge cost, long timeline, uncertain outcome, and basically decided against a full-scale weapons program. He authorized only modest funding to continue research, shifting the priority to developing a nuclear reactor and Uran machine for energy, maybe for submarine propulsion eventually. That meeting effectively killed any chance of a Nazi bomb during the war.
But that decision itself is wrapped up in the biggest controversy surrounding Heisenberg, his visit to Niels Bohr in Copenhagen in 1941.
Yes. The Bohr meeting. This is the absolute crux of the debate about Heisenberg's intentions. What really happened in that conversation?
Because we have two totally conflicting stories.
Completely irreconcilable.
Yeah.
First, you have Heisenberg's version, which he started telling after the war. He claimed he went to Bohr partly to seek moral guidance, but also to subtly propose a kind of scientist's pact.
A pact? What kind of pact?
The idea, according to Heisenberg, was to hint that physicists on both sides should perhaps tell their governments that building atomic bombs was just too difficult, too resource-intensive, effectively stopping the projects mutually, a sort of passive resistance by scientists.
Okay, that's Heisenberg's story. What was Bohr's recollection?
Terrifyingly different. Bohr never spoke much about it publicly, but decades later, unsent draft letters he wrote to Heisenberg were released. In those, Bohr remembered Heisenberg sounding confident, almost like an emissary of a winning German Reich.
Not suggesting they stop, but suggesting Germany was winning and pursuing the bomb.
Yes. Bohr got the firm impression, as he put it, that Germany was working vigorously on atomic weapons, and that Heisenberg believed these weapons could potentially decide the outcome of the war. Bohr found the whole idea of some secret moral pact completely unbelievable based on what he heard.
Wow, those are two fundamentally different accounts of the same meeting.
And the consequences of that meeting, regardless of Heisenberg's intent, were profound. Bohr was deeply alarmed by the conversation.
He must have been terrified.
He was. So much so that in 1943 he fled occupied Denmark, made his way to Sweden, then Britain, and finally to Los Alamos in the U.S.
And he took his fears and his knowledge about the German program, or at least his impression of it, straight to the Allies.
Exactly. His report likely added urgency to the Manhattan Project. So if Heisenberg had intended to slow things down, the visit had the exact opposite effect. It backfired spectacularly.
And then we have the farm hall transcripts, the final piece of hard evidence.
Yes. After Germany's defeat, 10 key German nuclear scientists, including Heisenberg, Hahn, and von Weizsäcker, were secretly interned at Farm Hall, an English country house. Their conversations were covertly recorded for 6 months.
And what did those tapes reveal when they heard the news about Hiroshima in August 1945?
They revealed genuine, utter shock and disbelief. Not the reaction of men who knew exactly how to build a bomb but had chosen not to. They were stunned that the Americans had actually done it.
That really undermines the idea that they deliberately held back, doesn't it?
Massively. It points towards a failure to understand key aspects of bomb physics, not a moral stand. And the most damning evidence comes right after the Hiroshima news.
What's that?
Heisenberg tries to explain to the others how the bomb must have worked. He attempts a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation for the critical mass of uranium-235 needed.
Yeah.
He gets it wrong, wildly wrong. His estimate is somewhere in the range of tons of U-235.
Tons. But the actual amount needed is much, much smaller, right?
Way smaller. It's in the kilograms range. Maybe 15 to 50 kilograms, depending on design and enrichment. Getting the critical mass wrong by that much orders of magnitude shows pretty clearly he hadn't done serious calculations on a bomb design.
He was thinking more like a reactor, which needs tons of uranium, not a bomb using fast neutrons.
Precisely. That calculation error, captured on tape, is probably the strongest piece of evidence that his understanding of the specific physics for a fission weapon was fundamentally flawed.
Okay, so putting all this together, the 1942 Speer meeting, the conflicting Bohr visit accounts, the farm hall tapes, the calculation error, what's the historical consensus now? Why did the Nazi bomb project fail? Was it incompetence? Was it some kind of subtle sabotage? Or just circumstances?
Well, for decades, you basically had two competing main arguments. First, what you could call the incompetence argument. This says Heisenberg, despite his genius in theoretical physics, just didn't fully grasp the engineering and, crucially, the the specific physics of a fast neutron chain reaction needed for a bomb.
As opposed to the slow neutron physics of a reactor, which he understood better.
Exactly. And that critical mass calculation at Farm Hall is Exhibit A for this view. He just didn't know how to build one, or even accurately estimate what it would take.
Okay, what was the competing argument?
That's the more, shall we say, morally convenient argument, sometimes called the sabotage argument, most famously pushed by Thomas Powers in his book Heisenberg's War. This suggests Heisenberg did know more than he let on, but deliberately misled Speer in that 1942 meeting.
That he intentionally exaggerated the difficulty and timeline to steer the project away from a weapon and towards a reactor, keeping it out of Hitler's hands.
Right, a kind of subtle intellectual sabotage. It paints him in a much more heroic light.
So, incompetence versus moral choice. Where does the balance of evidence fall now, especially with the Farm Hall tapes being widely analyzed?
The overwhelming consensus among historians now leans heavily towards the first argument, modified by circumstances. The Farm Hall tapes are really key. They strongly suggest that the idea of moral resistance, the narrative that they secretly chose not to build it or didn't have the moral courage to push for it, that was largely a post hoc rationalization.
Something they constructed after hearing about Hiroshima.
Yes, almost immediately. You can hear it developing in the transcripts. It was a way to explain their failure, both to themselves and to the outside world, especially their scientific colleagues. It salvaged their professional pride and offered a morally acceptable story.
So the failure wasn't really about one single thing, like Heisenberg's morals or just his physics mistake.
It was likely a combination of factors. Systemic problems were huge. The brain drain caused by Nazi policies, the scarcity of resources in a losing war effort, organizational infighting, Allied bombing, and layered on top of that, yes, key scientific missteps, and perhaps a lack of full commitment or understanding from the leadership, including Heisenberg, regarding the specific path to a weapon versus a reactor. Incompetence, compounded by circumstances, seems a much better fit than active sabotage.
It's a less romantic story, but probably closer to the truth. His story didn't end there, though. After the war, after Farm Hall, what happened to Heisenberg?
He actually played a really important role in rebuilding German science. He was released in 1946, went back to Germany, and became a leading figure in the scientific reconstruction.
In what way?
He was the founding president of the German Research Council, which was vital for getting funding and research going again. He was also heavily involved in establishing CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research.
Helping Germany rejoin the international scientific community.
Absolutely. And alongside that public role, he returned to his deep passion, fundamental physics. He spent much of his later career pursuing a unified field theory, trying to find a single mathematical framework. He called it the Weltformel, the world formula to describe all the fundamental forces and particles of nature.
He never quite got there, did he?
No, that's a quest still ongoing in physics today, but it shows where his heart truly lay.
So we end where we began, really, with this paradox. Heisenberg gave us the rules for quantum reality, revealing this fundamental indeterminacy at the heart of the universe. You can't know position and momentum simultaneously.
And yet, his own life throws up this unavoidable question, bridging that science in his historical context. When Germany faced the monumental possibility of the atomic bomb, how much of their failure was down to deliberate choice, his or others, driven by morality or resistance?
Versus how much was just predetermined in a way, by the hard realities of scientific miscalculation, lack of resources, the brain drain, the political system's failures.
It forces you to think about the relationship between knowledge, action, and morality, doesn't it? Heisenberg showed us uncertainty is fundamental in physics.
But his life demonstrates a profound, perhaps unresolvable uncertainty in human affairs too, especially when science and power collide. Trying to separate scientific error from moral choice in his story. Well, maybe that's the ultimate uncertainty he left behind for us to ponder.